Here we are.
Yes, good everything, everybody. It's the crack of dawn here on the East Coast. It's the crack of the ass dawn, and on the West Coast, with our folk joining us from Africa. Good
Yeah,
evening or good morning to you. Y'all are in full swing and
indeed.
all over the world. We appreciate you joining us. Good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning, Dr. Carr.
Good morning. Good morning, Professor Hunter. Yeah, it's early here, but it's late somewhere else, and it's midday yet somewhere else, and we are global. So it's good to see you, and thanks y'all who are coming in live today. If it's an unwieldy hour, we got a long day and a long week ahead. It was a long week last week, but good. We're good. We're in great shape. How are you feeling?
I'm good. I mean, the blessing of this is that you can come in on the Nubia side at any time, or even on the YouTube side at any time,
Anytime.
and catch up. I'm seeing so many people coming, new people who are starting from the beginning in narrative, which
Okay.
which I always envisioned, and
Okay.
then taking all of the the meta nature, the Mansa Musas, and going from beginning all the way through and catching up, and it's looking very beautiful. So
Oh, that's beautiful. That was the intent, huh?
that was the intent,
Uh,
to have a repository of goodness that people can access at any time, multi generations, and it would be here forever.
that's yeah, it's quite something to see. As I tell you yesterday, I was leaving the studio. Thanks to you at Sirius, Urban View Mornings, and I came on campus for a meeting I had to have, which I try not to schedule meetings on Fridays but sometimes it's the only time I have a little window, and I guess it was a tour day. There were a lot of tours out, and I heard somebody call my name. I looked around. I was in a father and son, and a bunch of young people, high school students from Jersey, and they are both here. They probably, I don't know if they're sleeping now. They may catch it later, but brother had on his shirt, his global majority shirt, and he said, "I said, you got it on?" I said, "Let me see." So he pulled up brother Marshawn, his son Marcus, and so I was like,
He had it like a superhero cape, like
"Yeah,
the picture. He lifted it up and then revealed revealed what's
indeed, the
underneath.
reveal." I said, "Okay, I ain't mad at
All
you."
right, Superman. I see
Yeah,
you.
I'm not mad at you. And a little bit later, I'll mention Wednesday. Professor Justin Hansford teaches over at the Howard School of Law, and I did a session just for anybody, students primarily, who wanted to come by and talk about the events of last week. And near the end, a group of students from Temple and Killeen, Texas, who had came in, and I'll talk about them in a moment. But one of the first year law students, it's like, "I'm a Nubian. My father's a Nubian. We never miss you." I said, "What you doing watching this and being in this when you were first year?" She said, "Yeah, sometimes I had to catch up, but my dad is." I said, "Okay." So I mean, like I said, you never know where everyone is. So
And that's how I assess victory. Like we are in a world of bread and circus, wins and losses,
mhm.
performances, everything is outward facing. But the conversation I had with Ta-Nehisi on Monday, first of all, let me thank him for, saving the best for last. But he said something about writing that, the work is done in silence. The work is done underground. I think about nature and trees before you even see a shoot come up of an oak tree. There's a lot of root work being done that may take years to ground that thing to be here hundreds of years. The angel oak that we visited in South Carolina. You think about a tree that's 400 years old. What does the root system look like? And we are in the process of root system building, which is something that we're not conditioned to do. But I imagine our ancestors did a lot of root building over 400 years, unseen to be ready to build Rosewoods and Greenwoods and Wilmingtons, and, not thinking about self-defense at the time because, you're just building. But now we know better, right?
That's
Now
right.
we know better.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely
We are
right. Of
in,
course, I mean that's the necessary dimension of silence. And something else I'll refer to momentarily. On Saturday night, we were over at Sankofa, where Ale Grima screened again his film After Winter on Sterling Brown. I'll talk more about Sterling Brown again in a moment, but he in the conversation, which is archived, y'all can go on Sankofa's YouTube channel if you want to watch the conversation we had after, not the film, but the conversation after. One of the things he talked about was the deadly to the imagination and to the mind disruption of all of these devices. He didn't have a cell phone. He has people, he has a landline in his lab where he's working on film. And if somebody want to reach him, they got to call a store and they'll send somebody around there. But he said the music comes in silence. And it does. It comes in silence. Our consistent conversations are, the time we spend here is really made possible by an unbroken string of hours and days of reading, of thinking, of being in conversation, teaching, learning, and then here a fraction of it shows up. But it wouldn't be possible if it weren't for those silences. And as a writer, of course, and like Ta-Nehisi said, I can imagine why that resonated. Writing, I have to resist in sometimes the pull, because I'll ask you, I won't declare, when you are writing, what sensations emerge from that deliberation, from that stillness? What process? How does it feel?
I haven't written well in about 10 years. Because the inordinate amount of energy that is required to do a radio show for 3 hours, Monday through Friday, to do this on Saturday, to try to rest on Sunday, but not really, because you're always thinking and planning and processing. But writing is for me, it is a skill, it's not a gift. And I actually mourn and lament not being able to sit. I've had 2 book projects. One I completely bailed on. One I'm trying to cobble together, but I realized when I'm writing at my best, it's a kinetic magic that happens when you're able to sit with the text and then come back and rewrite, and then come back and reimagine, and then come back and add chapters from the beginning to the end and fill in the blanks. And I wrote like 3 books in 2 years when I first started. I did my first book in 3 months, which is unheard of. Yeah. But it's just, I sat somewhere and didn't, was unbothered, and I had a job at the Daily News, but I could do that in my sleep. It wasn't this intense. It wasn't this intense because I was on the editorial board. So it just required me to sit in a meeting and then write. And then I would leave and go for hours. And, I had a boss that afforded me that because I did my work in like a couple hours. So I wonder if I have it in me. So you ask a question that I'm not sure I have an answer, but I don't know if I could sit down and do what I did back then, 30 books, just like boom, 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 boom. I've tried it. Yeah. So I need to find time. I probably need to just go somewhere and sit.
I agree.
Yeah.
If you couldn't do it in the way you did it because you're not the same person. It would be better, right? It would be better. So
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I have more to give, but I don't know if I have more energy.
Well, and there it is. That's what we, like you said, we have to be mindful of that, and also understand that there's a commitment that can only fully blossom through community. In other words, our ability to not only be mindful of, but act accordingly in that mindfulness of other people. As I've told people, I've been reading Slave Road, the new work by John Edgar Wideman. And let me see. In fact, it might even be worth. One thing I love about the stillness of the early morning and the late night is that energy carries over. So if you are watching this after we have gone live, and you are in the middle of the day, or you got your ear pods in, or you're sitting somewhere and everything is bustling around you, this energy is a little bit different than if the sun were up.
Absolutely. And while you're doing that, if people are in Knarrative with a K, there is a book directory, 300 plus bookstores, Black-owned bookstores around the world, where you can get your books. I'm just letting you know.
Yes, thank you. That's absolutely it. He in the first chapter of Slave Road, as I mentioned here, this is the new one, John Edgar Wideman. He writes about an African born here in the United States named William Shepard, who traveled many places in the world. Shepard was a missionary, quote unquote Christian missionary, but more than that, he was a human being who commented on, observed, and fought against the cruelty of human to human. In one particular case, in the Congo, the region of Central Africa we call the Congo. Some people are familiar with Mark Twain's book, King Leopold's Soliloquy, where he talks about the violations of the Congo. When I said Mark Twain, it made me, I'm just going to show this in passing, add to the compendium. We talked about James Percival Everett's book. This is a new graphic novel by David Walker and Marcus Kwame Anderson that remixes Huckleberry Finn again, except this one's called Big Jim and the White Boy. So it's actually a story of the man who Mark Twain chose to call N-word Jim, but it's about his family. You see your friend, you see our brother John Jennings commented on it on the back, where they retell it, but not only about Jim, but Jim
and Joel Christian Gill, who's on my show.
Yes. You see Joel Christian Gill. Yeah. What these what Uraeus's comrades are doing with the graphic novel is I have mixed feelings about it, though, because as someone who is, like say, a lifelong comic reader and collector, I appreciate the craft and the skill. And at the very same time, that's how they were saying about the digital devices. I mean, the phones and the digital universe and everything, the laptops, the cell phones and everything. When you're born into that environment, you don't get the chance, absent very deliberate intent and being surrounded in a governance formation with those who share that intent and who are determined to help you develop that capacity. You don't have the developed capacity or the environment that is favorable to it to sit with a book with words in it and no pictures. So, like I said, Everett's flavor is different with the language than Walker and Anderson's in this graphic novel. And we can see between the two, unless you've only come up in a world where, in fact, this would be considered reading. And in a minute, I'll talk about another graphic project. In fact, let me lean over here and get this bag out. I was down at the National Museum of African American History and Culture on Tuesday night. I'm going to talk about that in a minute and what that project was about. But ultimately, very useful form of writing. At the same time, if it is the only thing, then it becomes the standard to which people aspire. And that's not a good thing. But anyway, Mark Twain wrote about the atrocities in the Congo committed by the Belgians and before them the British in King Leopold's Soliloquy, Leopold being the king of Belgium, of course. But William Shepard was a black man who wrote about those things and talked about the atrocities. And he has been maligned in European cultural meaning making. And I mean maligned because if you remember, one of the endless streams, maybe the latest in the endless stream of white man master of everything on the planet, including Africa, called Tarzan, Edgar Rice Burroughs' fever dream. The latest movie, Samuel L. Jackson actually played William Shepard in. Samuel L. Jackson always brings a certain projection of black maleness, regardless of the pathological nature of some of the roles. And this was pure pathology. He did inhabit the role with, I suppose, whatever humanity a role like that could be populated with when you are completely undermining and remixing a person who actually walked the earth. But for some people, if you saw that monstrosity movie like I did, you may remember that character. Well, now you know that character was at least had the name, shared a name with, not based on, but shared a name with an African who did walk the earth. And in this first chapter called Who is Shepherd, what he's doing, what, of course, what I mentioned this before, what John Edgar Wideman is doing in Slave Road is really inhabiting the ways that the captivity of African people continues, persists, and continues to separate, wound, and destroy human beings of all backgrounds. And thinking about that in the context of the necessity for silence and the necessity to guard one's silence, but we filter that in the social structures that we inhabit today through not a spirit of generosity, but a spirit of selfishness and individuality. In other words, not a spirit of community, but of individualism, not a spirit of generosity, but selfishness. What do I mean by that? When we talk about a concept like self-care, we have to be very mindful of the fact that we are part of a larger web, a communal self, not just humanity, but all living things. And so the idea of self-care, if over-indexed by selfishness and individualism, becomes a rejection of other selves. Remember Dr. Du Bois and his credo, which he wrote in his early 30s, when he says, you know, we as African people should inhabit a pride of self so strong that it does not reject other selves. I'm thinking about that in this season of recriminations after the election of last week in the United States. And everybody's looking for somebody to blame. I'm going to talk about that a little bit later in Baltimore, which is why we're up this morning. There's a reparations conference going on there. And I was reminded late this week that I had agreed to give a keynote talk this morning. So when we leave here, I'm headed up to Charm City to give a talk. But one of the things I'm going to talk about is this question of how do we repair and where that spirit of generosity fits. And it made me think of Slave Road in this context. In this chapter on Shepherd, what John Wideman does is talk about how these selves mix. And I'm going to see if I can find it quickly, because typically when I read a book like this first, because I'm sure at some point Wideman, who spends most of his time in France now, will make a U.S. tour, and maybe somebody in one of the chats can look up. I haven't looked up the schedule yet because it's just happened, and I want to make sure that I don't miss him. Let me see if I can find it here, because he's talking about, here we are. He says, this is what he says.
Before you say something, he's going to be with Eddie Glaude at the public YMCA, New York, the New York Y.
Oh, New York Y, 98, was it 98th Street, 96th Street?
92nd Street Y, on Tuesday at 7:30.
Excellent. I will certainly wait until he comes to Politics and Prose in Washington, D.C. My friend and brother Eddie Glaude, who is perhaps pushing the limits of his employability at MSNBC these days by getting real close to that line between social structure and governance. I love and wish my brother very much well. It takes a lot of stamina to sit on a set with Joe Scarborough. So good. I'm sure that'll be an interesting conversation. I'm sure they will record it and I'll watch it at some point. I won't be watching Tuesday, however, because Wednesday, I have a talk that I've been looking forward to since they invited me to give it a couple of months ago, the 45th Charles H. Thompson lecture at Howard. And thanks for everybody who has signed up. There's a sign up. You can go on Howard's website, type in Charles H. Thompson lecture. You'll see you'll see it, and then there's a QR code, and you can attend in person or you can attend virtually. And I'm very much looking forward to. I've been thinking and rethinking and outlining and re-outlining and adding stuff and removing stuff. And my tendency is to include rather than exclude. And then that's why, as you say, it takes a long runway to write. I enjoy writing, but I don't create the time to do enough of it to satisfy that feeling. And I, in some ways, look at writing as an act of selfishness. But I also understand that it isn't. And it's really a matter of temperament and purpose. And so, having spent my life, my adult life, in classrooms, I understand that is work that is valued by everyone and that I value, or I wouldn't be doing it. And it is not valued by the institutions whose existence depends on exclusivity. So I think about that a lot. And so, yeah, I'm going to spend Tuesday night, probably up to and through the time I go to the minor building, the restored minor teachers college on the campus of Howard University at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, thinking about that. In fact, I'm going to try to clear out the whole runway. The only public interruption will be those 3 hours that we do the month now on Wednesday morning. But yeah, so I'll watch that later, probably next Thursday or Friday, maybe. I don't know, because I leave for Thursday evening, the Black Male Educator Conference in Philadelphia, and that's going to be very interesting. Thousands of brothers and sisters and children and elders, but mostly brothers from all over the country and some from outside the country, teachers in every conceivable formation, and we'll talk about that too next week. But here's what I wanted to read from. He says, let me start here somewhere good. He says that, and this is the thing about it, John Edgar Wideman. Wideman does not write those little short sentences. I'm a fan of short sentences when they are appropriate. I was teaching the Education of Black People, Dr. Du Bois's book of speeches this week in the Education in Black America class we have, and he's talking about his daughter Yolande, and he's got 2 4-word sentences, one against the other. When I don't even think if I had it here, I would read it to give you a sense of how the brevity can work, right? Oh yeah, here we go. I always keep some Du Bois somewhere around. This is when he went to Fisk and gave that commencement speech at his daughter's graduation in 1924, Diaterne Silenti, which, if you are in Nubia, when we read this book collectively, we spent a lot of time in this text. And he says, from 1910 to 1924, I was out of direct touch with Negro education. There came the world of war, during which I had sent my daughter to Bedale School in England, thinking the war would be short. She was forced to come home in 1914 and went to the Brooklyn Girls High School. She did not like it. The teaching methods and the atmosphere were strange to her. She stuck it out and graduated, but was indifferent to a college course. It occurred to me that she might be as thrilled as I once was if she went south to Fisk. I applied for admission after she was graduated from high school, and there was some rather curious and to me inexplicable hesitation, but she was finally admitted. She seemed happy there. She made no complaints. So I had a student read that out loud, and I asked them what they thought. And I said, now let's go back and pay attention to the language. First of all, I asked, was Yolanda excited to go to Fisk? We don't know. Got to read the language very closely. I said, who applied to Fisk, Yolanda or her father? I applied for admit. He did. Okay. Right. And what was the quality of teaching at Brooklyn Girls High School at the time she enrolled? We don't know. Are you sure? He said, there came the world of war, during which I had sent my daughter to Bedale School in England, thinking the war would be short. She was forced to come home in 1914. In other words, it would have been better to leave her there, but she couldn't stay there, and went to the Brooklyn Girls High School. 5 words next sentence. She did not like it. Why didn't she like it? Du Bois then speaks for her. The teaching methods and the atmosphere were strange to her. Well, if the Bedale School in Du Bois's mind and his wife's mind, Nina Gomer Du Bois, if this was the high standard, more Du Bois than Nina for sure. And Yolande was in that school. She comes back to the United States. What is he saying? He's saying Brooklyn girls is not as good. This one in American schools, she did not like it, didn't she? Why didn't she like it? Because in my assessment, this school was inferior. It goes on, stuck it out and graduate. And he says, but was indifferent to a college course. So now they're beginning to. Now we're talking about the text. Oh yeah, maybe she didn't. And then he says, it occurred to me that she might be as thrilled as I once was if she went south to Fisk. She ain't expressed no interest for Fisk. Du Bois, I'm gonna send her where I went, because can you imagine? That's why I asked him, can you imagine the pressure of being the child of W.E.B. Du Bois? Many of y'all ever felt that pressure? And that gave me a point of entry to talk about in another book we're reading, Claude Steele's essay in Young, Gifted, and Black, Stereotype Threat. The expectation of others that you perform in a certain way, that you excel in a certain way, that you move in a certain way. I haven't left self-care and I haven't left generosity, y'all. So I'm just working my way back around to that to make the initial point when we talk about this question of expectations and development. It says, I, not her, I applied for admission after she was graduated from high school, and there was some rather curious and to me inexplicable hesitation. I said, who hesitated, do you think? Was it the school? I said, I don't know. What you think? What were her grades like? Do you know? But he applied, which means that's my daughter. You're going to let her in if she failed everything, if she got a high school degree. Did she hesitate? We don't know. That's when you introduce other things. Letters they had, correspondence, which exists. Goes on. But she was finally admitted, meaning she wasn't an early admit. She wasn't, but maybe it was, okay, Du Bois's daughter, we got to let her in. But here are the 4-word sentences, 2 back to back. She seemed happy there. She made no complaints. After they reread it, the whole thing opened up. 8 words split up into 2 sentences of 4 words each. She seemed happy there. She made no complaints. But this is Du Bois writing in advance of the speech he gave, where he excoriates Fisk for bending to the will of white boys in Nashville who held purse strings, who terrorized Fisk with their white nationalist ideas, who were assaulting the intellectual development of young Black children, and the faculty and administration at Fisk that were letting them do it. Footnote, shout out to Tennessee State University, my alma mater, where the white boys, Jason Mumpower, the MAGA comptroller of the state of Tennessee, and the white nationalists who run the legislature are now banging on Tennessee State, saying they don't have any money and they're running deficits. These same hill billies who think that their dying way of life is something they can still wield like a cudgel over the lives of human beings, particularly human beings of African descent, in a way that somehow will break us on the best day of your deeply underdeveloped lives. You can't rise to the power to break us. However, in this season at Tennessee State, they are banging on the board in the administration to somehow close a deficit that is there because they have starved Tennessee State to the degree that they can, to the tune of over $2 billion, at least over the last generation, the last quarter century, by an accounting called for in the legislature by Black legislators. They want Tennessee State to sell the downtown campus of Tennessee State University. Remember the crackers, not the hillbillies, not the white boys. I'm using a word now that is a term of art developed in the 19th century for the poor white, the ones Du Bois writes about in Black Reconstruction in America. These crackers want the downtown campus of Tennessee State University. It's in the shadow of the state capitol. And remember, it was the downtown campus of the University of Tennessee at Nashville in the 1960s, something they built there because they did not want to go to school with Black people. They did not want Black presidents and Black teachers and Black administrators and a black board controlling an institution that they would have to submit themselves to go to. So they built very quickly a downtown branch of their hillbilly empire in East Tennessee, the University of Tennessee. They built a downtown campus, and the black lawyers got busy, led by Avon N. Williams, as you've heard me talk about him many times. Avon Williams, who at one time was called in Tennessee the most hated man in Tennessee because the hillbillies hated him. He was smarter than all of them bound up together into one collective soul, could not reach the toenails of Avon Williams in a courtroom. And he led a charge that defeated their white nationalist attempt to undermine Nashville's public institution, which happens to be a historically black institution. And for the first time in the annals of U.S. legal history, a black institution merged with a white one, and the black one took over the white one, and it became the downtown campus of Tennessee State University. And in 1987, they named that downtown campus for Avon N. Williams. And one of the great honors of my life was standing next to him as he sat in his wheelchair with the disease that would eventually take his life, and helped him alongside everyone else cut the ribbon on the renaming. The white boys want the campus. And so you see, this is what white boys do. And I respect them for this. They remain consistent. If they are young girl lovers, shout out to Matt Gates. If they are religious zealots, shout out to Mike Huckabee. If they are toadies, shout out to the white Latino Marco Rubio. If they are toadies, shout out to the men who, our brother Roland Martin had a birthday last week, and he was on social media, and he said maybe these two are fighting for the job of lead usher at the White House because they've not been announced for any cabinet position. Shout out to the white adjacent servants of empire. That would, of course, be Tim Scott and Byron Donald. When you are consistent, if you lose a battle in the short term, you just wait and you plot and you plan. And they cut a ribbon in 1987 based on a case that was filed initially in 1968. But you wait. And then in 2024, you come back around having starved the institution over the intervening years and say, sell that campus. Why? Because the hillbillies, the crackers will wait. Will wait. But guess what? On the best day of your waiting lives, your demise is assured. Read your world history. Jason Mumpower, Tennessee legislature. Say what you want, do what you will, because your consistency will not outlast our common humanity. And so Du Bois here with the university up the street, Fisk University, says of his daughter, she did not like it when she came back to the States, and then said she seemed happy there. She made no complaints. And I just thought about that in terms of the short sentences that can open up so much. But it seems to me that today we are trafficking in increasingly shorter sentences, replacement of words with images, and people teaching writing shorter is better. I see those writing books all the time. And I'm like, and then you read a John Edgar Wideman. And the reason why I was looking for a point to start and realized that it would be difficult is because John Edgar Wideman will write a sentence that take up the whole page. You ain't supposed to do that. Sure you are. If you can carry the thought, it takes a skill. So this is what Wideman says. He says, impossible for Shepard or anyone else to number exactly the victims. Any number as unverifiable as the amount of suffering an African child, woman, man endured crossing the whale road. Whale road is a concept that comes from the boats that would chase the whales across the ocean. And he's using these metaphors, whale road, slave road, to talk about these continuities between, not the divisions between. He says this flesh railroad, and no contemporary database, no matter how sophisticated, can render today an inkling of that quantity, that quality of suffering either. So why bother to count? What do the numbers mean anyway? Shepard might ask or guess or wonder or sigh or weep or moan. Better to imagine himself as poet entitle himself to interrogate himself like those old English bards or old Norse bards with their kennings when they gazed at cold, endless expanses of sea, at the uselessness of all words they had learned to describe their sensations, their experiences of gut, fingers, toes, as they drown and disappear each time they confront the enigma, the infinity of an ocean's ice-bound, unfathomable heart, which suddenly, after all, was not a heart at all, not any word known. So if you attempt to write the truth of it, best to pretend as poets pretend when they say they write from the heart. Though poets understand very well that the heart they say is responsible for words they write is certainly not the warm organ inside them pumping blood through the body. Not that heart any more than that piece of meat heart is what Shepherd searches for as he stares and stares over the ship's railing at a cold, heartless sea, staring and looking for words as poets do when they write poems, on some good days anyway, when all things seem possible, and he attempts to invent a different word, another word, not heart, not mind, not exactly gut, toes, fingers, clinging, not alive or dead, a kenning rather, a figure of speech, a slave road consisting of body after African body. And though he cannot say how many, surely more than enough enslaved bodies, one after another, laid head to foot, foot to head, to create a slave road crossing the Atlantic Ocean, reaching from Africa to this new world. African bodies, and some like his, mixed with like him. William Henry Shepherd thinks, not exactly only African bodies, he's sure, but sure all the bodies on the slave road are people's bodies. And you can try to count them for yourself if you disbelieve him, doubt his numbers, his count them yourself one by one, stepping on them, in them if you dare, as I must dare, and Shepherd must dare to count them, touch them, no choice. The only accurate accounting must be step by step, body by body, bodying our way across the wide, cold Atlantic on a slave road that brought us here. All those bodies not alive, not dead either, but stretching across the sea. Bodies enough and more, Shepherd guesses, to form a multi-lane slave road all the way from one world to another, a slave road crossing oceans, bodies floating substantial atop the water so he can go back and forth forever, not on a phantom highway, but a slave road persisting, timeless as time, never floating away. And every now and then traffic so thick, so sticky and stinky and sloppy underfoot, you slip and slide and wince and cry out and groan as you watch others crossing, each one in a separate lane, glimmering or deeply shadowed lanes imagined so each body does not sink and vanish. A lane offering guidance, hope perhaps that other bodies are alive or dead, coming or going to support your crossing. He goes on to write about how all human bodies are mixed together and connected to each other, and that the slave road creates the illusion that the bodies of those who have been marked black are somehow separate from the bodies of everyone else. The question of generosity and community as distinct from questions of selfishness and individualism, in the concept of self-care and withdrawing from the world in order to contemplate, if we don't calibrate it and balance it with the fact that we are never completely separate, then the things we experience when we think, when we write, when we are in conversation, evoking similar and at the same time different sensations, should always reveal to us that not only are we never alone, but that our withdrawals, to the degree that they are physical withdrawals in order to manage our energy and engage in those acts of care, are not indeed designed to withdraw forever, but to regenerate in order to contribute to the thing that exists, whether we acknowledge it or not, which is what the community. And so in the wake of last week and the 2 weeks that preceded it, those 3 parts where we talked about what we could anticipate with the upcoming and now in the rearview mirror U.S. federal elections. And we talked last week about doing it our way. We have a way. And while I would never call it a slave road, I respect John Weidman's metaphor and understand why he did it. And as he uses it, he's also bringing into that arc what Dan Black grounds himself in, which is the Africanness of those bodies that form that unbroken bridge. I would say that this week, in anticipation of later today in Baltimore, Wednesday here in DC at Miners Teachers College, and Thursday, Friday, Saturday in Philadelphia for the Black Male Educator Conference, I wanted to just maybe be in community for a few minutes today around the theme that is the subject of the talk that, if I live, I'll give on Wednesday afternoon at Minor Teachers College: Black Institutions, Black People, Black Possibilities. Because the energy from this previous federal election continues to shift, continues to morph. And the global social structures that we find ourselves in, reacting to what they anticipated might be the outcome, Trump proofing in the case of NATO, moving closer to Iran in the case of the Saudis and the UAE. The Chinese continue to pump out electric vehicles in a number and a quality that Elon Musk can only fantasize about, with his porcelain-fronted friend Vivek Ramaswamy, as they prepare to play with your lives with white and Indian Steve Urkel aplomb. Did I do that? Yeah, pushing buttons. Well, as this social structure, global social structure, continues to fight elements of it anyway to cover this inexorable shift of economic and political tumult, because the old system is never coming back, and it wasn't great when it was there. In fact, it was terrible for most people in the world, and now it is sliding inexorably into something else. But as that happens, there is a desperate attempt by those who own those means to generate, regenerate, press forward this distracting and numbing facade of normalcy. I understand there was some cosplay ring combat last night. Like you, Prof, I didn't watch a second of it, nor will I watch a second of it. I'm 59 years old. Iron Mike Tyson is a year younger than me. So why in the world would I watch that bread and circuses? I've never seen a snap in the career of the man who is widely lauded in the city of Baltimore, Lamar Jackson. Who knows if I ever will? Probably not. That's out of my system now. I am not watching any of the sports washing behemoth of the Emirates pumping by the millions and billions, I suppose, at this point, of dollars into the National Basketball Association, as I watch pretty much nothing but Africans run up and down a court 10 at a time for the in-season tournament. These are the distracting and numbing facades of normalcy to be inserted between the shocks to the system of complete and utter everything from criminals to reprobates getting ready to take the keys to the federal apparatus. And if no one thinks it matters, all the folks who had hashtag abandoned Harris, who are now writing to a person who enacted within days of being sworn in a Muslim ban, writing letters to him, imploring him to keep his promise to say to Palestinians, if you ever had your mind, you've lost it somewhere. But this is the aftermath. I experienced no schadenfreude. I experienced no satisfaction from that, because people are dying. And you've given the keys to the hardest of the killers. And in the streets of Tel Aviv, as the reports come from every source and resource, there are celebrations. And the finance minister in the Israeli cabinet has said it's time to annex the West Bank. We turn to these three subject institution people and possibilities because they should anchor how we plan to seize the momentum of memory in 2025. So much work we've done, work that lays a foundation for greater and better and deeper, and I won't say better, greater and different work that will just expand and continue to expand. And at the center of that work is not the idea of the individual, but the collective, because there are a lot of people doing a lot of work, and we're going to talk about a handful of those people on the way to close today. But we have to remember Black institutions, Black people, Black possibilities. So, as this energy shifts a bit, and as the threat of the distracting and numbing normalcy looms, as that facade attempts to reclaim our momentary focus and commingle with this sense of resignation or despair. We tried. I mean, no. In fact, in a class last week in my Black Aesthetics class, Africana Meaning Making course, we have a final assignment that we began discussing in earnest this week with about a month left. And so we're spending the rest of our time workshopping their work and projects. And I wanted to give them a sense of, how narratives are shaped. And so, I played the Freedom commercial that came out shortly after Beyonce Knowles Carter told Kamala Harris's campaign they could use her song. I said, how does that make y'all feel? People said, I wish she had won. And then, okay, what else? And I waited and I listened until somebody elicited the word I was looking for. Hopeful. So that's an interesting word that's often bandied about in campaigns. You say, I got to get 2 terms in the presidency off that phrase. What do you mean by hope? Well, it was a reminder that this is what was being projected, whether it was reality or not. I said, there's the point exactly. This isn't about policy, although there is no comparison. One candidate in the presidential election had policy. The other one had a vibe of white supremacy, made a primal call, race answered, and the rest is history. Now we hold our breath and hope there won't be a nuclear war, among other things. And for the majority of people who did not vote at all, understand that you will not be protected from whatever harm will come to all of us as a result of your choices. I won't put a critique on it. But the hope came from the images of people of every different background, walk of life. And the Democrats are excellent at that kind of theater. They'll drop a swamp creature in, shout out to James Carville. They'll drop Asians and Africans in, young and old, and people of all kind of backgrounds that have the inspiring music. They're very good at that. Their policies look closer to to policies that will benefit that panoply of humanity than the white nationalists whose stark whiteness should at this point continue to be striking as long as we retain our common humanity and not succumb to the distracting and numbing facade of normalcy, the Trump washing and the sane washing that took place in mass media that is celebrating now as their stocks begin to rise this week. They're following the news, CNN, MC, stock rising just a little while because, they got what they want. As many people have made this mention many times, Les Moonves of CBS said the quiet part out loud, as people like to say, Trump's better for us. But absent that distraction, there's still this sense that there is a global we that has to be activated by pockets of we's that are committed to community, not individualism, that are committed to generosity, not selfishness. And that in this criminal enterprise of the modern world system, the contemporary world system, and those outposts of the criminal enterprise, like the state, the United States of America, Black institutions have been as responsible as any, indigenous institutions being another kind of comrade in this work, to anchor themselves in community and generosity. As I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, I've been rereading key Black thinkers on this question of politics in the confines of the United States. The great Robert C. Smith, who I interviewed for the Black Table shortly before he made transition, his book, We Have No Leaders, African Americans in the Post-Civil Rights Era, about how Black politics in many ways was absorbed into this 2-party politics system and remained a force, but not nearly the force it was in the 1960s and early 70s. And Robert Smith's comrade, who wrote the foreword to We Have No Leaders, Ronald W. Walters, of course, I've been mentioning this book and I will continue to mention it, White Nationalism, Black Interests, Conservative Public Policy in the Black Community. It is Ron Walters, of course, who says in this book then when you survey Black people, the concerns they have are very much grounded in a question of community, healthcare, employment. It isn't just their individual well-being, but the well-being of others, their families, their communities, everybody ultimately. And consistently, what Black folk embrace with the majority, what he calls the Black mainstream. When people say all Black people don't think alike, all people don't think alike. You said nothing. Let me be very clear about this. You said nothing. There are no communities that all think alike on everything. There's a white mainstream that we use to describe the mainstream press, no, in the white mainstream. There is a Black mainstream. We are part of the Black mainstream. We say a lot of the things that Black folk are thinking, but when they find themselves in white spaces, again, my friend Eddie Glaude often finds himself in those spaces. Other Black people watching that are reduced to trying to scrutinize the face for the side eye, for the head shake, for the head lower. And then every once in a while, when the white nationalism is so thick, you can cut it. And in fact, threatens to choke your breathing. You then erupt, as Eddie did in the wake of the election, and said, it's racism to his comrade there on the panel, the white woman, and I forgot all of them on first names. I don't watch NBC that much, but of course, in order to even erupt, however, he prefaced it with who are African people to other people, to kind of maybe diminish the blow that was coming in the next sentence, with a word, with a phrase that I would much prefer to hear come out of the mouth of Donny Hathaway, but Eddie Glaude said it to the lady that was sitting there. I love you. This was racism. Okay, why did you have to say, I would much prefer to hear Donny Hathaway. I love you in a place where there's no space and time. I love you. You're a friend of mine. Yeah, see when Donny Hathaway says, I love you in a place. I know that, but when Eddie Glaude says to a white woman on stage, I love you, but I love you means, come on, man. That's not a governance logic. That can't be the way of knowing, right? But then maybe it is. I don't know. But my point is that you got to set it as a point of entry to hit with the punch, because you don't want to mess up the access. But when you're in a Black space like we are right now, you can do what you want to do. By the way, I did sneak out Thursday for a moment because I wanted to see it before it came out on the small screen. I think CNN is where it will eventually show up. The Luther Vandross documentary. I would recommend you go. I think it's a great telling of Luther's life. I think it's beautifully put together. The narrative is there. But if you set all that aside, we all know that the cultural meaning making, which empties into movement and memory, we will be singing Luther songs forever as long as there is singing. And so if for nothing else, it's the songs. But one of the points that was made later in the documentary is that, Luther Vandross did not cross over. I don't mean he didn't intend to reach the larger markets or that he did not reach larger markets, but the idea is that Luther Vandross's music, grounded in Africana ways of knowing, grounded in the governance formation of African people and the cultural meaning making of African people, did not enter the social structure to this day in ways that make him inexorably a major icon of popular music in a way that is indistinguishable, whether you're talking about African people or non-Africans, whites. No, Luther stayed in the Black pocket, not because he wanted to. And so that led me, as I'm sitting there looking at this film, to wonder what it was about those ways of knowing, about that work, watching him reinterpret songs like A House Is Not a Home while Dionne Warwick sat there and by the end was reduced to tears and told him, you have made the definitive version of this song. Because, I love Dionne Warwick, as y'all know, and listening to her sing those songs from the 60s, particularly the Burt Bacharach and Hal David collaborations, things like A House Is Not a Home, as she sang songs, and as Jamie Foxx says in the documentary, this man was singing about furniture. And when you hear Jack Jones sing it, a chair is still a chair, even when there's no one sitting there. Okay, it's very nice. House is not a home. He's hitting all the notes. And then you hear Luke, a chair is still a chair, even when there's no one sitting there. But a chair is not a house. And you see Dion, I mean, Jerry Fox, that man singing about furniture. So what it is underneath that, it didn't allow Luther to cross over, might have been the unvarnished spirit of African people that unsettles people who have built their whole lives on the idea, as James Baldwin would say, that they are not, thank heaven, you. Oh, but that common thing, that commingling from that slave road that just bleeds on over into you and reminds us that human to human, we're all connected. You can't, it just come. But black people, we don't need a word between us. So when, you know, my man Eddie has to say, I love you, but it was racism. That's a social structure. Who Africans are to other people. And I appreciate you for speaking truth to power, Eddie, but we're in a black space. We don't have to do that, as the energy from last week diffuses a little bit. And we enter this quarter of life in a way, still, particularly our young people, kind of either bemused or angry or not even knowing what to feel, which is why we continue to have these convenings like we did on Wednesday at the law school, like we might do one more time before the break in late November. Talking yesterday with some folks and who asked, you know, could we do it again? Sure. I mean, as many times as we need. But we need to have these rituals. We're entering the ritual season now, the rituals of return, like the holiday developed in the United States, marking the beginning of the genocide of the indigenous people, that people using it as an excuse to come to their communities again, the name that will not be named. Reflection and convening as we enter the last month of the calendar year, anticipating the deluge that is about to descend upon us. A riot, not like January 20th, 2021, but a riot that is now a call coming from within the House and the Senate and the presidency and the Supreme Court. As we think about that, we should spend this moment now, this little quarter, these few weeks, turn into these three subjects that have to anchor how we plan to seize this momentum of memory for 2025. Black institutions, Black people, Black possibilities. So we know in the social structure, they've been these post-mortems. There's the surge of MAGA, you know, the federal appointments. Everybody's obsessing over the possibilities of recess appointments. In other words, you don't have to have somebody confirmed by the Senate if you can appoint them when the Senate isn't convening. And therefore, you have up to 210 days. You could just keep switching out attorneys general, keep switching out heads of the Health and Human Services, the largest of the cabinet appointment entities and the largest of the departments. If you read chapter 14 of the mandate, chapter 14 of Project 2025, written by a person who worked at HHS, who works for the Heritage Foundation, who is proposing everything. No, there is no, if you get pregnant, you have to report to the government, but there is the proposal for if you terminate a pregnancy, you have to register that termination with a database. And there is the assertion in chapter 14. Let me just pull it up here so that folks who want to read it for yourself, since now I can't put this on the shelf as a relic, Roger Severino, page 449, can't put it on the shelf as a relic, but need to probably keep this around as a playbook. Department of Health and Human Services, Roger Severino. Roger Severino writes in chapter 14, and just for a little bit of background information about Roger Severino, Vice President of Domestic Policy at the Heritage Foundation, Director at one time of the Office of Civil Rights. Jokes write themselves. At the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services from 2017 to 2021. Yeah, that's the Trump era. What he says is that they're going to monitor these people who come from states where it's not legal to terminate a pregnancy and move to get a pregnancy terminated in a state where it is widely available. He's calling them in this document abortion tourists. And he says the states that suborn that behavior through enshrining in their state law the right are havens for abortion tourism. See, these zealots are real. It ain't just Mike Huckabee saying that saying that there is no Palestine. There are no Palestinians. There's only Judea and Samaria. So there's the MAGA surge in the postmortem wake. Right? And you read that chapter on HHS, Bobby Kennedy should scare the living hell out of you. She's scared because remember, that's not HHS is where they have the Center for Disease Control, CDC, with all of its problems. Also the FDA, all kind of things. If you don't think a mask ban is coming, you're not paying attention. So if you think you're going to be protected because these hillbillies come out here with no vaccines and the Negroes who are confused right behind them, and you just put your mask, you can't put your mask on in public, get ready for it. You're thinking of the abortion bans, the mask bans may be coming too at a federal level. We already see them at the state level. But Project 2025, step 3 and step 4 are full steam ahead. I would encourage you to check out our colleague, Larry Daniels Favors, who did a nice short kind of summary of how this thing worked out. We've been talking about it, but she put it right there, as Joe Madison would say, where the goats could get it. So you can look at it. We're now in step 3 for the boot camp for all the thousands of employees that they're going to just use to swap out all these people whose now good government jobs are being threatened. People in Prince George's County, I saw a report on local news about the people feeling real nervous in Prince George's County who worked for the federal government, so many of them for decades, and now worried about their jobs being lost. They should be terrified at this point. And then the 4th stage, of course, which is the 3-month agenda. The executive orders for day 1 are already being lined up. My only question with the Muslim ban is whether or not it's going to be on day 1. Maybe it will be. Because anyway, I'm not going to talk about those cabinet appointments. That's for another day, and it doesn't need to be that day. At the state level, as I said, Tennessee State is an example of that. They're saying, you haven't been fiscally responsible. Shut up, Jason Mumpower, you MAGA. Everybody calm down. I've been rereading. I went back to the bricks for my man, Amos Wilson. And shout out as well to the sister who called in yesterday morning on Urban View to remind us about Blueprint for Black Power, which she was right. In Nubia, I'm like, there are so many things I would love to do. We might have to do a study group on this brick of a book. But if you think Project 2025 was something, then this book is almost as long. This is 800, and if you include the back materials, the profiles of other books by Amos Wilson, about 890 pages, so about 30 pages short of Project 2025. But this is the great Amos Wilson out of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, whose work, Blueprint for Black Power, is remarkable. In fact, we might just have to do a separate reading, maybe once or twice a month, just come in Nubia at an appointed time and go through Blueprint for Black Power. But the MAGA surge is at the federal level, the state level, and at the local level as well. We see the assault on our friend and brother Chokwe Antar Lumumba in Jackson, Mississippi, and set up sting operation, a go-between, classic episode of a sitcom or a bad B movie in late night cable television. In some stories, it ain't no good guys, as John Clark said, but it's some good guys and bad guys in the state of Mississippi. The bad toupee wearing governor, the hillbilly legislature, the feds involved, and they have in their sights not a young girl lover like Matt Gaetz, not a trafficker in cruelty like the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, or the governor of Florida, the pufferfish, Ron DeSantis. Not a hillbilly bean counter like Jason Mumpower in Tennessee, but a mayor who has committed his entire public life to improving the conditions of people in a majority Black city that is the economic engine in terms of cities in Mississippi for the state. But one like the downtown campus of Tennessee State University that the hillbillies will never rest until they have seized control of, and their fingers, their feet, their toes, their eyelashes, their entire being will fall apart before we yield to you, you hillbillies. And yet that does not prevent them from continuing like a drumbeat, to continue, to persist, to attempt, to irritate, to agitate, to claw back, to recede, and then come forward in this fight. This is the MAGA surge. But then there's the what we got wrong crowd. in the postmortems in the social structure. The John Olivers on HBO, the David Brooks from the pages of the New York Times, the Nate Silvers with his insufferable use of numbers as a proxy for meaning, that Jacob Carruthers shot down in 1972 in his essay, Science and Oppression, the ordinal classification that stands in for reality, but really it's about hierarchy. Why did she lose? Why did she lose? And the what we got round, or there is no we. As much as I enjoy listening to John Oliver at times, or Keith Olbermann or others, there is no we. The constant reminder that the we you are projecting forward is a fantasy, strung together by increasingly fragile threads of narrative, revealing that, in the words of the Reconstruction era during Andrew Johnson's presidency, this is a white man's country. And if you needed a reminder of it, you got one Tuesday before last. And then there's the it's racism group. People speaking truth to power, but in these white spaces where it's almost more for entertainment than any substantive change. And of course, that would be like, man, Eddie Cloud or Joy Reid or anybody else, you know. And then there's the Go Whiter group, swamp creatures like James Carville, or operatives like the Chocolate Wonders friend, David Axelrod, saying that the chair of the Democratic National Committee should be Rahm Emanuel. Well, there's no need to waste your breath, because if that's what you're thinking, then, as Ron Walters writes in White Nationalism, Black Interest, we will continue to vote in whatever way will advance the collective interests of our people. Our values determine our votes, not political parties. So when people say, saying vote for the Democratic Party means you're a shield for the Democrats. Mouth is open, brain on display, and we see that there's some radical intervention needed to feed more nutrients into that brain so that it can grow larger and overwhelm the very tiny and narrow conceptual universe that would lead someone to say that because you voted for a candidate who has a certain letter behind her or his name, that somehow you are a shield for that party. As Ron Walters explains in White Nationalism, Black Interest, what you see Black people doing is voting for their values and trying to determine in a duopoly which of the political parties gives them a better chance to advance those values. It's actually quite simple when you think about it, unless you're trying to misinterpret it. Then there's the We Persist group. And that We Persist group is very diverse in the social structure. We talked last week about the more quote unquote radicals. Those are the ones, you know, whether it be Abandon Harris or whether it be, you know, this duopoly cannot persist, so therefore we withdraw, or a third party candidate. And it's very interesting since Tuesday before last how some of those same elements are now reaching out to the Trump administration, incoming Trump. You need to do this, you need to do that, as if I'm saying this is the cognitive dissonance. This is the answer to the question that was asked before the election, which is, okay, we don't do it this way. What way do you say? And there was never an answer. Now we're seeing the answer. The answer is, yeah, please. Oh, please is the answer. Well, damn. If you said that a month ago, people, y'all crazy. So you were okay, so you didn't have an answer beyond the duopoly. Your answer was Democrats are genocide, and then Republicans get in, please. Yeah, because that's going to work. Where you going? Wait, they took your passport. Wait. Hey, oh, you want me to come over here and march? And then you see the shot. I don't have the shot and fruit. I'm not leaving any tactic off the table. That would include the vote. But then there's that group, what we talked about. And then there's the symbolism at the confluence of governance and social structures that we use in our Africana studies framework. And so you have those who are coming out of governance formations, like the governor of Maryland, Wes Moore, who are firmly ensconced in the larger social structure, who African people are to each other. Certainly looking forward to 2028, people saying, oh, Wes Moore will run and Gretchen Whitmer will run. Okay, fine. Kamala Harris, y'all forced her early. She might have run in 28. Okay, fine. All that, no, we're not talking about that right now. We're talking out of a governance space. So Wes Moore, I'm sure people saw on Monday. We talked about it in office hours on Monday night here in Nubia, in the Nubia side. The governor of Maryland, along with Adrian Jones, the head of the Maryland legislature, Black woman, on Veterans Day in the United States of America, made Araminta Harriet Ross Tubman, a brigadier general in the Maryland National Guard. That means nothing to me in terms of any fidelity, allegiance to, or feeling for the criminal enterprise called United States of America. However, it means a great deal to me as we watched a Black woman who is a major general in that same National Guard drape over the neck of the great grandniece of Harriet Tubman, Araminta Ross. Sister Tina Wyatt draped that star, the General Tubman. No longer just a metaphor, but a literal rank. And as Wes Moore said, everybody stand. You got to get up. And then one white dude looks back at the camera and then comes back. Yeah, everybody. That means you. Everybody is Black thought. Every damn body, get up. And you see this moment. It's right at the nexus of social structure, who Africans are to other people, and governance, because Harriet Tubman in the social structure was and will always be a criminal. She stole herself, her property. And the same federal government that the white nationalists hate when they are not in charge and love when they are in charge had passed in the decade that opened her exploits, her work, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, meaning that if Araminta had been caught, she'd have been returned to the eastern shore of Maryland, and who knows, probably executed, because she was committing a federal crime every time she left. So you can make as many movies about heroic white savior points of entry figures as you want and magical Negroes, but the reality of the matter is that woman was a federal criminal. And today, she's a brigadier general in the Maryland State Guard, a slave state, as Governor Moore reminded people, as he said, I wear it on my flag, on my proudly wear on my lapel. Proudly wear is another version in my mind of I love you. I proudly wear on my lapel the flag of Maryland, which is a combination of the Union flag and the Confederate flag. And Governor Moore said, and we have to remind ourselves that this is the northernmost southern state, that the Mason-Dixon line. He says, a reason the Mason-Dixon line runs through Maryland. I said, you better talk that talk, Wes Moore, and attempt to back up our common humanity in public policy. The ballot initiative that I voted on to reaffirm a woman's right to control all of her healthcare decisions, which is in the Maryland Constitution, that's not the United States of America, where you better believe they're going to try to push through a national abortion ban. But the question then will become, how do the states resist? The new Governors Association that has been founded to resist that kind of thing. These are real politics, not theoretical politics. And there's a we persist group, even though that we is transactional too often. And that symbolism at the confluence of the social structure and the governance structure, represented by Wes Moore and Adrian Jones standing there on Veterans Day in Maryland and saying, Brigadier General Araminta Harriet Ross Tubman. On Tuesday night, I was at the National Museum of African American History and Culture, because the previous day, on Veterans Day, had I known about the brigadier general rank, I probably would have tried to make my way to Maryland. But as it was, I was standing at the United States Colored Troops Memorial, 209,000+ names of men of African descent who were veterans of the Civil War, fighting for their liberation, and incidentally, preserving the Union, because that wasn't their goal. Their goal was a governance goal. We will be free. And they didn't attribute that to Father Abraham or any other white man. They attributed it to their own efforts. Women and men, but the men were the only ones who could serve in the military at the time. And so I was there. Our friends Frank Smith, the director of the National Afro-American Civil War Museum, beautiful building being restored. Our sister Joni Eisenberg, who is a Nubian, probably listening now, who takes some of our conversations and has WPFW broadcast parts of them. And I mean, it's a beautiful thing. And we were all there. And as I was standing there, Sister Deborah Minkart, who directs the Teaching for Change outfit and entity, which includes, among other things, the Howard Zinn Education Project, the DC area Educators for Social Justice, the Black Lives Matter at School initiative. Dr. Wilkinson, Sister Courtney, of course, principal of Roosevelt High School here in DC. Teacher for Change has met over there often. These are teachers. And I was sitting there talking with Deborah, standing there at the memorial as we get ready to do the wreath laying. And Deborah was talking about, all the things that are going on. And I'm a proud comrade of the Teaching for Change collective. And these are school teachers, K-12, university, doesn't matter, community centers, everybody, churches. And constantly meeting, constantly writing curriculum, constantly discussing, teaching, and learning. And to be part of that collective is very important. And she said, you know, tomorrow night there's an event over at the museum where they're talking about Reconstruction. And I said, oh, wow, I didn't have it on my card, but I think I'm going to try to go down there. So I made my way down. There was a 6 o'clock thing. So right after class, I rushed down to the National Mall, and it was discussion. Kate Manser and Liz Clark have done yet another graphic novel. I think this is the thing now. These historians who are writing books that these young people don't read, and anybody else, now they're going to go to the comic book. And I'm like, okay, well, you know, I'll get it. This is called Freedom Was in Sight, a graphic history of Reconstruction in the Washington, D.C. region. Kate Manser and Liz Clark. And of course, they go to people of African descent, shaking hands, this kind of thing. It's a beautiful, beautiful, I mean, illustrators did a great work on this. And you see African people. And there's a sister at the center of this who I will be talking about. She's the narrator who kind of leads the whole conversation. And I'll be talking about her because she was the first Black graduate of DC Teachers College, Minor Teacher College, where I'll be speaking on Wednesday evening. This is Emma Brown, the first Black school teacher in DC to be trained in DC. Emancipation, chapter 1. And so it tells her story, her family story. She's the narrator, and then the story of all these other Black people. And I'm mentioning it because this is part of the We Persist group. The teachers, 35th anniversary this year, by the way, of Teaching for Change. Thousands of teachers across the country, some outside the country, doing this work on weekends and nights, meeting. Another reason why this commitment to Saturdays has been so important, and is so important because many of you all are in here now. I hear it. I saw down Tuesday night at the museum, people coming up, I'm a Nubian, or I watch in class, or I'm just people going back and forth. And so there are these things, whether it be the Democratic Governors Group coming together to say, you know, not here, not in this state, whether it be the American Civil Liberties Union taking out a full page ad in the New York Times and say, we're not waiting for day one. We starting to sue you now. We're going to go against you now. And this Rethink America spirit, as I said, showing those students that freedom commercial, not as a reminder of the loss of Kamala Harris's loss, they voting for and then crying. No. As a reminder that the only thing changed between November the 4th and November the 6th was that there was an election, but the agenda of November the 4th that you had, which is different than the Democratic Party, that has your interests at the heart of it, that didn't change. And it's not going to change. And so that visual representation from the social structure took on an added resonance because it didn't change. Then Wednesday, got up, we did Urban View Morning, beautiful thing. Again, people calling in, having that conversation, very important, and rushed over to the Howard School of Law with Justin Hansford. As I said, we had a noontime conversation, and near the end of the conversation, got a visit from Dr. Rodney Duckett and the elders who accompanied him from Temple, Texas, and these students from the Heritage Legacy Curators. That's what they call themselves. Young men, the Heritage Legacy Curators. These are young brothers. And so shout out to Tristan and Dante and Isaiah and Kenneth who came and talking about what they read. They read Destruction of Black Civilization. They didn't just read, they studied it. So we talking about it. They breaking it down for me. I said, look at y'all. They knew Amos Wilson. We're talking about Francis Cress Welsing. I mean, these are young brothers, teenagers. Isaiah, barely a teenager. I think he might be in the 8th grade. Anyway, so in the conversation, I'm like, this is incredible. And there was a young sister there, Ken's sister, Elajane. Shout out to Elajane because her mother, a couple of sisters and a brother that came with Brother Duckett, her mother came, so she came. And I said, Elajane, is that a Yoruba name? And she said, well, my father's favorite basketball player was Hakeem Olajuwon. I love people. Our people. So they named her Elijah. And I said, okay, so it is. Because Olajuwon is a Yoruba name. This man was a Yoruba man. So you got one by proxy with the intent of a way of knowing that when it, you know, okay, so I understand. And she was asking me, she was reading a trilogy. And she wanted the second and third books in this trilogy. She's been reading it at home, and she was reading it on the way up here. And then she asked, and so we found a bookstore near Howard University School of Law to send her to that had the book on the shelf. If they'd had time, they could have ordered it in from Sankofa, but Sankofa didn't have it on the shelf, and she wanted the book now, so we sent her up Connecticut Avenue to a place that I was fairly certain would have. the books. And anyway, in the conversation, they got so enraptured and they got a chance to sit with some of the law students. That's why we have Black institutions, y'all. Yeah, these Black law students in there. Shout out to my man Lee Williams, who talked with them, who did Howard undergrad, who's also at the Howard University School of Law, and Brother Cameron, who talked with them as well. Because one of the young brothers wants to be a lawyer. Well, here you are, 16, 17 years old, talking with some law students who are also Black men. That's invaluable. If you want to know why Black institutions are important, you see it again. And they're part of a countrywide series. In other words, a global series. That's what we're part of, this global convening, to see that. And it's generational. You know, I mean, we could talk about that. Baba J, thank you, Jeremiah Wright, sending me maybe yesterday or the day before a clip from my man Ricky Jones, who's at the University of Louisville, where they had one of these convenings where everybody had to get together because young people are talking, don't know what, let's just talk. And in the convening, they asked him, what'd you think of the election? He said, it's going to be unpopular opinion, but actually I was excited. What do you mean? Because had she won, we would have been told that racism is over and everybody can remember what happened with Obama. Yeah, he said, well, now that she lost, maybe we will now realize that this is an illusion. And I agree 1000% with Ricky Jones. Not that I'm happy that Harris, because people are going to be harmed, you see. It's to my radical friends who don't think their jobs are going to be affected, but they will be. And I hope they won't be. But again, people will be harmed. Your plan was to do this and then start begging Trump. And to the most consistent ones, I'm talking to the ideologues now, they won't beg Trump any more than they were going to beg Harris. They'll simply sit on the sidelines and talk about how empire is inexorable and how we must resist and we got to have meetings and get together and organize and we got to politicize the people. Okay, is this 2024 or 1930? Because it seems like we went to that meeting. Oh, you studied. Okay, I understand. But the point is this. In those convenings, so I'm not happy about it. However, I do have a renewed enthusiasm and a determination to seize the momentum of this moment while people are saying, what? Yeah, come on. You ready now? Let's get serious about this study. Black institutions, Black people, Black possibilities. That's why I'm taking this week very serious. I take every day very seriously. I'm taking this week particularly seriously because when I leave here in a minute, going to Baltimore, then coming back here, doing what we do on Monday night with office hours, teaching my classes, then going to Sirius, and then Wednesday, we're going to have a conversation. If you haven't registered, please do, because there is a virtual component to that. And so, and then Friday going to Thursday night, going to Philly with this convening of thousands of people. This is a feeling that will be in some ways as potent as the feeling in the wake of the O.J. Simpson acquittal and the convening shortly thereafter of the Million Man March and Day of Atonement. That feeling was electric and ebullient. It wasn't about O.J. Simpson being a good guy or a bad guy. It was about, yeah, MFs, and then let's get down here and handle some business. We seized the momentum of that moment. There are things that still echo and resonate from 1995 and the Million Man March, but in many ways, we also didn't gain from that moment the type of momentum we thought. This is another moment. It ain't that, but it is something. And there's something there. And I promise you, I'm trying very deliberately to tap into that. I think we all are, to kind of do that. So shout out to the legacy curators and the Intelligent Minds Proving and Applying Commitment group. That's the larger formation that Dr. Duckett created called Impact Becoming. And so, what Ron Walters says here as well is that we vote our interests, but when it is clear that whiteness is going to white, as young people would say, that it is inexorable and it is intractable. In other words, what he writes in here is when it's clear that these white people are going to do what they do, we retreat from banging our heads against a wall as if in sport. This is a moment to retreat, not from the work, but to come within, and in that spirit of generosity, refurbish and renew and remember our Black people, Black institutions, Black possibilities as we reset. And just like these hillbillies, these white nationalists in the wake of the great civil rights legislation of the 1960s made a blood oath vow in the wake of the Lewis Powell memo of 1971 to dump billions into things like the Heritage Foundation and the Federal Society and to grow their bench and to return back to 20th century. Perhaps we can now seize this momentum of memory moment, focus, and ground our Black possibilities in the deep study of the victories that preceded us. Maybe now it's time to talk about the white primaries and how we broke the backs of the white primaries in the 1930s and 40s. Maybe it's now time to consider on the legal side. If you're a lawyer or you want to go to law school, you thinking about it, think about the 14th Amendment for sure. Think about the 5th Amendment, sure. But also think about the First Amendment. Do we approach First Amendment jurisprudence? I've been talking with Angie Porter about this and Aya and Nellie as well, trying to go back and forth. Alethea Watkins, perhaps because John Robinson and them loved the First Amendment. Just like the white boys hate the federal government unless they're controlled. Then they love the federal government. Well, guess what? The 14th Amendment was the strategy that Pauli Murray and Charles Hamilton Houston and Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley and Robert Carter and Spotswood Robinson and Oliver Hill that they used in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s to push forward. Well, guess what? We maintain that, but perhaps we should also look at freedom of association. Even as they tried this week to push through legislation in the Congress, which they will absolutely be able to push through in January, to give the president of the United States the power to ban or to strip through the IRS tax exempt status from nonprofit organizations that they deem to be terrorist supporting, which will translate as suppressing free speech. And if you don't think the ACLU and everybody else is not going to sue, and then Johnny Boy, I know you don't watch, but some of your clerks probably do. Watch this, baby. That same First Amendment that you rammed down our throats with Citizens United, that same First Amendment that you used to hide your feckless belief system behind, claiming it was constitutionally protected speech, to say, I ain't baking no cakes for no queers, and I ain't making no websites for them either. Yeah, you remember Hobby Lobby and 303 Creative. Yeah, versus Alennis. Sure. Well, guess what? We use it now. Oh, you want to use school vouchers for your funky white Christian national schools? Well, I want to use it for my African-centered schools. What you doing? I'm doing what you doing. You got two choices. Give me my money back so I can fund our independent institutions, or say we can't have it and tear up your funky constitution once and for all, because it is a lie. And if proving it's a lie means testing the limits by embracing some of the things that you have embraced, thinking that that was going to save you, then let's dance, baby. Because I promise you, you don't have the stamina, you don't have the feet, you don't have the music, you don't have the timing, you don't have the standing to dance with us. So if that's what it means, when we retreat, when it's clear that this is a useless strategy, then that's what we do. That is the strategy. So as I said, the week ahead, now we're going to stop because in a minute I got to go to the Humanities and Arts Education for Black Liberation Conference. My man Lawrence Jackson, Johns Hopkins University is sponsoring it. I'm going to have some thoughts about that this morning as well at 10 a.m. I think they want me there at 9, so I'm going to get out here in a minute. They were on, this is it was the Homewood campus of Johns Hopkins. So they were at the UB Blake National Jazz Institute on Thursday, the Baltimore Unity Hall today, and they're going to the Reginald F. Lewis Museum. So I'm going to do that surgically, because I really, if it was up to me when we get out of here, I wouldn't talk again until Monday night, and then do Tuesday. And then the next thing out of my mouth would be on Wednesday. Well, I got to do class, but it was a way for me to do it. But anyway, the Inheritance Baltimore and the Struggle for Just Futures conference is what they have. And the topic they gave me is cultural work as reparations, which, me, and kind of, well, I'll say this for the end. And then, of course, like I said, Wednesday is the 45th Charles H. Thompson. Charles Henry Thompson, an educator out of Mississippi for 40 years on the faculty of Howard University in Washington, D.C. This is the brother Louis Ray's 2 volumes dealing with Charles Thompson. This is Charles H. Thompson, policy entrepreneur of the Civil Rights Movement, 1932 to 1964. And 1954, right before Brown. Then the second volume, Charles H. Thompson on Desegregation, Democracy, and Education, 1953 to 1963. Thompson was the founding editor of the Journal of Negro Education, which I'm going to talk about as well. And among a lot of things, I won't preview that. I mean, like I said, y'all can sign up, and I encourage you to, because it's going to be interesting. The full title of the talk is Mining for the Momentum of Memory: Black Institutions, Black People, Black Possibilities. I say mining for the momentum of memory because it's the Minor Teacher College. Matilda Minor founded it. It was founded in 1851 for the training of Black school teachers in the District of Columbia. It eventually merged, Minor did, with 2 other institutions to form the University of the District of Columbia. And I was over there actually on Wednesday looking a little bit at the archive to pull out a few things to talk about Had Harris won, I agree with Ricky Jones. It might have been, with all the good that we could have pushed for differently, having a better opponent in the White House, it could also have served as an anesthesia in some ways, but she lost. The question is now, will we do it our way? This renewed reading and study, this renewed organization. Nubia is set up in many ways it's set up. And one of the ways it's set up is people find other people who are doing things, and it enables those like capillaries in a body, like a system of blood vessels, to really pump that blood out to these other organs that are doing things, even as the corporate body is represented in Nubia, in narrative, as a glimpse of Black possibilities. And again, thank you, Ginger in Texas, who reminded me of Amos Wilson's Blueprint for Black Power. So, probably the last thing I'll say was what I said I was going to say a minute ago. Elijah, her mother, and the other sister who came with them, they were supposed to go to the White House on Thursday. The group, Dr. Duckett and them. Those three didn't get their approved. They didn't get on the White House list in time. It was kind of last minute decision for them to come, so they didn't get a chance in time. They weren't able to be cleared in advance. So they came to my Education in Black America class, which was another real treat. And in the conversation, we were reading Du Bois's Field and Function of the Negro College. And we were talking about, this question of how university being the Black Harvard or the Black Ivy League. And so, of course, we completely have thoroughly dismantled that and the conversation. But we said, what I was saying is, can we imagine a different concept? Even as we've jailbroken the Black university, this isn't an HBCU here. This is a Black institution that does not honor any notion of hierarchy. This isn't what that is. So, as we work toward the Black university, it'll be at the Black university. And we jailbroke the Black university. We're here. But in the context of HBCUs, I said, what if we had a different concept? Instead of the Ivy League, which we should thoroughly and completely abandon, where the Ivy at? And we don't need that. What about like the Cavalry League? Where we had the Cavalry League? That's the HBCUs. Instead of saying HBCUs, let's get rid of all that normative nomenclature. Finally realize Jacob Carruthers' vision of breaking the chain that links African ideas to European ideas and speak to our ancestors without interpreters. Now we got the Cavalry League. What? That's the HBCUs. You call them HBCUs. We call it the Cavalry League. And just that little concept, we started talking about the possibilities, and you see students' eyes light up. And you see, and I was so glad that Elijah was there, because she got to decide where she's going to go to college in the next couple of years. And afterwards we were talking, and she said, we standing there with her mom, her friend, she said, I like the way this class worked. And I thought to myself, I did not say it to her, but I'm going to say it here to everyone, she may be here. This class is not how every class works. Our vision, our possibility should be that it should be the way every class works. And so that's our commitment. I'm going to stop with
that. There's so much work to do. But I'm grateful and I'm thankful. Have a great speech today, Dr. Carr.
Thank you. I look forward to some of the Nubians. I'm sure I'm going to see some, because they be all up in Baltimore.
Yeah. And so for everyone who got up super early, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
If you're watching this on demand, appreciate you. See you in office hours on Monday.
Yes.
And Dr. Black's going to be on my show on Monday too. So,
yeah. It's that time of the month.
It is that time of the month.
That's a beautiful thing. Thank you, Prof. Yeah, I see everybody. Okay. Love y'all. Let me head on down to Charm City. Love you.
All right. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.